All right. Welcome, everyone. So, title of my talk, Relentless Defense, right? What we're trying to do here and what brought about this talk was just kind of an experience that I've had throughout the years talking to a whole bunch of cybersecurity teams all over Earth. I started as a cybersecurity analyst myself. I was a SOC manager for a number of years. I became involved in SANS and I teach two different classes on it, and I've talked to a lot of people just working in basic security operations, triage, incident response, and those sorts of things. And I just seem to notice the same patterns over and over and over again. And with a 30-minute time slot here, I wanted to try to sum up all of the things that, in my mind, seem to be the repetitive patterns that lead people to success when it comes to defending an organization. So that's what we're going to jump into for these 30 minutes here. Quick introduction to myself. My name is John Hubbard. I'm one of the senior instructors here at the SANS Institute. I'm the cyber defense curriculum lead. I'm the author of a couple courses as well, all that have to do with security operations, and taught a few more beyond that as well. So, Blue Team is my love, it's my focus, it's my wheelhouse. And this is what I just love talking about with anybody who's going to listen. So, thank you all for showing up for this one. My two courses, Sec 450, Blue Team Fundamentals. That's a course for training people who are in the newer half of their maybe career working in a security operations capacity for SOC analyst training effectively. I was a SOC manager. SANS didn't have a perfect class for early stage SOC analyst training. That's where it came from. The other one is the other end, building and leading security operations centers. If you're interested in managing or building a SOC from the ground up or improving the one you have, that's another resource I have out there. I co-authored that with Mark Orlando, who's also another outstanding individual in the space. And I'm also the host of the Blueprint podcast. If you haven't heard of this, just search any podcast aggregator for Blueprint. It is a show where I try to interview people who are doing the most interesting things in security operations and just help them spread the good word about whatever it is that they have learned from their own research that's going to help you better defend your organization. So, with that being said, let's jump into our presentation here. So, relentless. I was trying to think of a strong, powerful word for this one because what I'm trying to go through here is a bunch of kind of maxims and just kind of what seem to be core laws to me for success in a space that is very, very difficult to get right. The definition, right? Showing or promising no abatement of severity, intensity, strength, or pace. This is exactly what we need for cybersecurity operations because we know we are going to be met by an attacker that has the same amount of energy. So, what does relentless mean to me if I'm translating this general word into a cybersecurity concept? One of the things I think is absolutely critical is just being aware from the start, having the ability to actually see what's going on your network. Should be an obvious thing, probably sounds like an obvious thing, but putting it into practice is maybe not as simple as a lot of people would like to think it is. Every time I'm out teaching a class, we have this conversation about collection. Are you able to see what's even happening on the network? And a surprising amount of people struggle with this, but it's one of those kind of preconditions for getting this sort of thing right. Another thing would be the ability to act fast, and I emphasize fast. If attackers are delivering phishing email, getting an exploit landed against one of your machines, but you can jump into action very quickly, then okay, maybe there's a little bit of collateral damage there, but really no harm, no foul if you can clean it up quickly and they're not able to actually get into the network and cause massive damage. See, not every attack is going to land you in the headlines, right? Especially when it's just a single phishing email that lands. So if you can jump on it, no matter what the intent was, it's not going to be a huge deal, even if you have to wipe a computer or two along the way. But speed is the thing that unlocks the ability to keep yourself out of the headlines. We'll hit that from a number of angles going through this talk. Practiced. So you may think practiced and speed are kind of the same thing. In my mind, there is some overlap there, but it's not entirely the same. Practice to me means when I give you a situation and you are presented with this, just the alert just went off, this tricky thing just maybe happened over here. Is there lateral movement going on? Do you know the right move to make in any given situation? Like, can you make the right call to most effectively block that attack, no matter what that thing is? And can everyone on the team do that? That's a really, really important thing when it comes to talking about being relentless and ultimately just being an intimidating defense team. You want the defenders to be like, this is going to be a challenge. If you can see everything on your network, if you're going to react fast and they know you're going to make solid decisions about what's happening, attackers are going to be the ones at the disadvantage, right? And that's exactly what we want to create here. A bar so high that most attackers would either give up and just go to the next organization. There's that saying about you don't have to be faster than the bear, you have to be faster than your friend. It's kind of true when it comes to cybersecurity as well. Now, not all attacks, right? If you're the one company that has the one thing that group wants to steal, they may come back and back and back again. But when it comes to ransomware groups, if you're doing a really good job, they might just move on to the next company and not waste their time, right? So, why is this so important? Attackers are ridiculously good at what they do. If you read any of the resources that I'm going to be pointing out throughout this presentation, you will get the notion that you have to be very fast or disaster is going to strike. The softer your network, the softer your defenses, the faster they can move. And the faster they can move, the less chance you have to catch them before you become a headline, before you become a monster breach story. And it is really, really tough to get there if you're just trying to kind of nonsensically do whatever you have in your mind that day. You have to have focus. You have to think about the things that are going to have the most impact. And no matter how talented your team is, no matter what technology you bought, if you have the fanciest, newest XDR and you have an unlimited license for visibility and all of that, but you can't make good decisions or you can't make them quickly, your tools and your technology aren't going to save you, right? So this is a critical thing to consider, all of these factors we're going to go through. So the first item is the terrain. Do you understand what you are actually defending? Again, this sounds like it should be very, very simple, but every single class that I teach, at some point, I go, do you know what's on your network? If I picked a random device, how long would it take you to tell me who owns that device? And I literally just taught a few days ago, and someone at that point, it's like, infinite time? Because they have no idea. A lot of people do not have any kind of configuration management database, or at least one that they trust. And so the principles here, if you don't know the thing is there, if you don't know what that thing does, even if you do know it's there, if you don't know who owns that thing, and if you don't know how an attacker might attack that thing, you cannot defend it. Say it with me, right? This is impossible. This is a precondition for getting it right. You have to know what you're defending. Can you imagine a military showing up and being like, I don't know what we're defending here. I don't know what the ground looks like. I don't know what the terrain is like at all. I don't know what these weapons are. I've never used any of this. I've never seen anything. No one briefed me on it. That's what you're doing if you can't understand your network. Like, it doesn't have to be down to the most microscopic degree, but you have to have a general sense of like, these are the subnets, these are the core services. Everything is prioritization, right? I'm not saying you have to know everything to the most like 100% degree, but at least those things that hold your core data, keep your company running, produce value for your organization, you at least better know how those work and how someone might attack them, right? Because without that, you're starting from a imposition, and it's going to be very, very difficult to get anything right if you don't even at least know what you're trying to do from the start. As the saying goes, right? If you don't know where you're going, any road will lead you there. It's true of cyber defense as well. So, one of the steps to get going in the right direction, assuming you know what you're talking about, is also forcing attackers to play on your terms. You set the rules as a defensive team. We have this quote from The Art of War here, right? The Art of War teaches us not to rely on the likelihood of the enemies not coming, because they will, but on your own readiness to receive them, not on the chance of them not attacking, because they will, right? But rather on the fact that we have learned to make our position unassailable. We have to make it very, very difficult for them to get in, right? If we know what we're defending, then we can ask ourselves questions that ultimately all roll back up to least privilege. Do you know exactly what does and what does not need to happen on your network, in the accounts that people are using, on the programs that are being run on everyone's machines? Even if you can't do it everywhere, again, think about where you can do it and can you at least apply it to those most crucial areas, to your business critical services. If you can start from a place where it's not everything can talk to everything on every port, you're going to have a much better chance at defending, right? So the best companies I see at this, in fact, I just had a student that was telling me this a couple days ago. They're like, we have micro segmentation, we have these tools that lock everything down. There is no communication over the network that isn't with a pre-approved protocol. Right there, right? That's going to shut a lot of doors of the capability to do any kind of lateral movement. And then on top of that, even if they do use a approved protocol, they're monitoring it. And even if they do get into that endpoint, well, things are locked down with application control. We already heard some about that today. if applications are locked down so they can't bring their own executables, if you're monitoring scripts and using PowerShell with like JEA, just enough administration, and some of the other features, constrained language mode to monitor and limit what people can do with scripts, you're now closing the doors of how they can run malware and what's even going to be available for someone who does get a foothold on your endpoints. On top of that, if we can just understand the type of interaction that people should be having with an environment, even if they get through all of that, we can say, that's an anonymous kind of thing going on over there. That person's never logged in and done those things before. That person's never connected from that part of our network before. There's always something you can find. But if your network is chaos, it's going to be really hard to find anomalies because any kind of anomaly can happen at any given time. So start with, at least in the places you can, at least in the places where it's most important, define what is allowed so that oddness sticks out. That is one of the core things that I can tell you just in the prevention part of getting this right. Beyond that, modeling threats. If I were to ask you right now, can you name me 3 threat groups that are like a big worry for your security operations team, for your organization as a whole, right? Threat groups that focus on your industry, who have attacked your partners or maybe attacked you in the past, right? Do you know who they are? And that was what we would call kind of top level, high level strategic intelligence, or maybe even operational intelligence, which is kind of the middle layer. We need to take those very top level items and say, all right, if we know these groups are likely to attack us, then they are probably one of the biggest threats. And assuming they have some terrible ideas for what they are planning to do to us, then we have to take that to the next step and resolve it down into finer and finer grain detail of, well, how are they going to do it? What indicators are they going to be using? What tools do they have in their toolbox? And we can start to make a threat model of when group A shows up in our environment to do objective X, these are the things that we can predict they are probably going to be doing. Certain protocols, certain lateral movement techniques, command and control, beacons, and all sorts of exploits. There's information on a lot of these groups out there. And at least what is available to a security operations team, either for free from like the MITRE ATT&CK groups page, which is an awesome resource to start with that is totally free, all the way up to paid vendor solutions where you can go to, Mandiant or CrowdStrike or whoever and say, what do you know about these groups? You can get a really good idea of what to expect. And when you know what to expect, you can prioritize your finite time and your finite money against blocking the things that are most likely to happen and most likely to be the most damaging if they do happen. And so we create threat models and we think about, all right, so given all of that information, given how our network looks, how would this attack go down? One thing I love talking about all the time is the practice of making attack trees. Attack trees are starting from the end of an attack. Ransomware just got delivered. Okay. We take one step back from that and say, well, how do we make every computer on a network run the same code at the same time? What systems would even be allowed to push code to every single computer on the network? What kind of accounts would enable someone to stage malware on the system that can do that? And you basically walk backwards and you exhaustively um, enumerate all of the different options that could be used for that one attack that you're most worried about. And then after you make this kind of backwards chronological listing of attacks, you have a tree, right? Where the root is the end of the attack and the branches and the leaves are all the things that can get you there. And once you get to that state, now you have an amazing way to say every single box. Can we prevent this? Can we detect this? Are we even logging anything related to this? Do we have the right data sources to see these things? And you can also turn those things into priority based alerts, or not priority alerts. And you can use that to say, well, if those things on that tree happen, like that thing should be blinking red and screaming in the sock, like pay attention to this because that's potentially a very early indicator of a very damaging attack. But you'll never know that if you don't go through the exercise of making an attack tree in the first place. So, threat modeling, you can do it in a lot of ways. Attack trees are my favorite, one of the ones for the SOC that I see a lot of really good teams do. Beyond that, we have to be able to master our tools. What I mean by this, we cannot defend without technology. Our SIEM, our EDR, XDR, NDR, whatever kind of stuff you got out there, firewalls, secure web gateways. But just having the technology is not enough. You actually have to know how to wield that technology in the way that's going to disrupt an attack. If you can't do that, you're still going to be stuck. So, the thing to really think about here is, do you feel like you really understand and get all of the value out of those fancy, expensive tools that your organization has bought to monitor and generate all of this monitoring data? If you have bought a let's say you go out and you buy like a race car, a Ferrari or otherwise, do you think people who are doing this with the intent of racing it would buy the car and then be like, I'll figure out how to drive it, right? No, they're going to go to a racetrack. They're going to buy some lessons. They're going to figure out and be trained in how to actually shift and everything else. It's the same thing with your tools. I've heard this story over and over again, which is kind of what gave birth to this slide. People were like, well, my company will buy this really expensive tool, but then they won't buy the training for it. I'm like, all right. So you have the world's most capable thing, but no one gets anything out of it more than a simple text search for logs or something like that. You really have to be able to dive in and understand your tools and how they work, the language and syntax required to query them, all of those sorts of things, and the weaknesses as well. Every tool has a strength, every tool has a weakness. And if you don't know the weakness, that creates a blind spot. And it's not just a blind spot, it's a blind spot you don't know about, which is the worst kind of blind spot. So the best teams know their tools deeply, and they also know what their tools can't do. On the flip side of that, what about your enemy's tools? Do you have a good take on what the attackers are actually able to do? So, what I'm saying here literally is as a defender, have you ever taken any kind of offensive training? Now, this may not be the priority thing you're going to be going for, but you do need to have some kind of clue of what attacks are out there and what kind of things are possible with the common frameworks that exist. So, Cobalt Strike. Have you ever read the manual for Cobalt Strike? It's used in so many different breaches, but if you don't know what it can do, how are you ever going to find it, right? Evil Jinx, the thing they're doing for MFI bypass and those tools like that, you should go out and read those things because if you don't know what they're capable of, you're not going to spot it. You're not going to even know it's possible, let alone get in the way of it. So think about all the attack tools that are being leveraged against you. Once you find these things in incidents, don't just say like, oh, well, we found Cobalt Strike and that's the end of it. Say, well, what's Cobalt Strike? It's being used against me. I need to be familiar with this. Dive in, look at the features, look at every single thing that can be used for persistence, for command and control. If you don't know these things, you're not going to be able to stop it. The best teams not only know their tools, but they know the attacker's tools as well. Quick example of this. If you read the Red Canary threat detection report that just came out not too long ago, remote monitoring and management tools are one of the big things that's being used for ransomware right now. I just copy and pasted their giant list of tools that all effectively let attackers install what would otherwise feel like a trusted program, but when wielded by an attacker, let them into the network. You may be familiar with some of these names, you may not be familiar with other ones. One of the things every defender has to do is just look at all the tools that accomplish a certain functionality and just try to keep it in your head. Because if you're looking at your network and you're like, someone just installed Screen Connect. I mean, it sounds like business software. I don't think we use that here, but it's probably fine. Trusted program, right? No, no, no. We got to know where these things weave into an attack story and be familiar with what they are. Different resource for this. There's a lot of really good blogs out there that have write-ups on how actual attacks occur. The DFIR report is one of my favorite ones. There's also malware traffic analysis, which has actual malware samples. You can go there, you can download the samples, you can download the packet capture, you can practice looking at beacons and seeing what's going on. You can download samples from any of the online sandboxes. You can look at URL scan and look at phishing pages, fish tank, open fish. Just go out there and practice, right? That's something that's going to come back around in just a second. Log files, looking at example log files. Here's some quick resources for anyone looking to jump into these sort of things that I find to be very, very useful. And, generally people love these as a resource for keeping up on what attackers are doing. Beyond that, optimizing your operations tempo. We already had an introduction to the UDA Loop earlier when Gene was talking about it. These four stages map very closely to what a SOC has to do. Observe what's happening on the network. Can you even see the logs? Can you see the packet captures? Orient. When the alert goes off, will you really understand what's going on in that alert? Or is it just going to say, like, oh, it's another CVE, and I don't really know what that means? Hopefully, you know the deeper implications and can read between the lines. And when an alert goes off and someone says, hey, this thing just went off, you're like, oh, that's potentially command and control on a machine that's already 3 layers deep in our network. The alert might not say that, right? But you have to understand your network and your attackers and their tools well enough to jump from the literal alert name to what does that really mean in your environment. From there, decide, do you have the ability to make the right decision as to how to contain that attack and start to eradicate the attacker? And can you make it quickly? And then that's the last stage, act. We know you want to act. Can you act? There's two pieces of this. Do you have the tools, like an EDR, where you can click a button and isolate a machine? And do you have the authority to do it? Being able to do it technically is different than being able to find the person, tell them you need to take their service down, and get that done before the attacker continues their attack. So, all of these things, you have to do them accurately, but you also have to do them faster than the attacker. And if you don't do it faster than the attacker, it doesn't matter how good the team is, they're going to stay ahead of you. How do we stay ahead of them? Constant practice is one of the ways that we can up our operations tempo. If you're not practicing, you're going to forget. And when you forget how to do it, you have to go back and relearn the next time that thing shows up. And that slows you down. And when you slow down, the attackers win. So, what are we going to do here? Some kind of constant practice. I've been watching a lot of March Madness recently because Purdue's in the Final Four now, and I'm a Boilermaker. So, what I was recently watching on Netflix, just because I was in the basketball mood, was this documentary called The Last Dance. And if you haven't seen it, it's about Michael Jordan's career back in the 90s. And one thing that struck me was his intense focus on practice. And he had this quote: "Get the fundamentals down, and the level of everything you do will rise." And I started thinking, yeah, that's absolutely true of information security as well. We need to be great at the fundamentals, or we're never going to be able to do the bigger, more complex actions. If you don't know how to use Wireshark and pick out command and control traffic, if you don't know how to parse through a log file from Windows security events, or remember what the numbers are, it's going to be really, really difficult to move quickly. So, continuous practice in a number of different ways will be one of the things that's going to be a differentiator between a team that's like, oh, this hasn't happened in 2 years and we haven't practiced it. What are all the commands? Do we remember how to do this? And one that's like right into action, right? That's what we need. Practice is going to make the difference. One of the ways of practicing is testing your detections. Testing your detections with things like purple team, red team, pen tests, right? Adversary emulation, whatever kind of tests you want to do, they're all good. They're all useful. They all help you sharpen the sword and make sure that things still function and that when they do go off, you are sure of what to do. What we want here is something that becomes muscle memory. As soon as you see any kind of alert go off, everyone jumps into action, shows up calm, cool, and collected, making good, rational decisions, and knows exactly their part in the dance of incident response. That's what we need. Purple team testing is one of my favorite ways of doing this. In my experience, purple team testing has been going through an entire exhaustive list of like, let's test every single command and control mechanism that our pen test team knows about, individually checking every single one. If you want a tool that is great for facilitating purple team testing, there's a tool called Vector. If you go to vectr.io, that is the website, totally free tool made for purple team testing. Used it in my career, outstanding results. Please try purple team test if you haven't done one before. One of the best ways to test your detections. The best teams are always testing their detections. Just talked to a group last week and they're like, every single analytic we test every single week. They were awesome, predictably, and that was one of the reasons they were, right? Beyond that, active defense. Active defense, short story here. If you can make the OODA loop slower, less accurate, intentionally spoil it for the attacker, you are putting yourself on higher ground with a little bit of extra effort. Think about, what are attackers going to do? When an attacker gets on an endpoint, what are they looking for? They're looking for anything that says the word passwords in the file name. They're looking at anything that looks sensitive. They're pulling stuff out of browsers. They're doing whatever, right? You can look up any pen test class, go to the section where it says, what do you do once you get access to a box? And then think about, how can I maybe use Windows file auditing or something like that to set up a trap? Just leave passwords.txt somewhere in my documents, something like that. And then if attacker ever goes in there, they're going to open it, right? And then you would immediately be able to cut a Windows log event, send it to the SOC, something like that. There's a million versions of this. It can be honey tables, honey API keys, files, accounts, honey groups, all sorts of different variations on this. This is an incredible technique and it takes very little effort and it leads to very high fidelity detections. The best, most relentless defense groups are really into active defense and they're getting a lot of benefit out of it. Threat hunting. I'll make this short and sweet. Everybody needs to be threat hunting. I don't care how new you are. As soon as you have data, you can threat hunt. You don't need to have a world's, top quality threat hunter. You don't need to have done this before. You don't need to have gone to college for threat hunting. Of course, people will be better if they've done this for a longer time, but that doesn't mean give up. It's very easy to get useful data out of threat hunting. Here's how threat hunting works. You read some threat intelligence and you say, well, there's an attacker that would probably attack us. Here's what they do. Here's how they do it. Do I have a detection for that? If the answer is no, then conceivably they could be doing that and you're not detecting it right now. So your hypothesis becomes our attacker would do these things. If they're doing these things, second question, what kind of data would be produced if they were doing that in our environment right now? Then you go to your tools, you pull the data. Is there evidence of that thing happening or not? Right? And if it's there, you have just caught an attack and you can spin up incident response and get into it. It doesn't have to be any more fancy than that, right? The tricky part is just knowing what to look for. And it's not even really necessarily that tricky, right? You can just focus on your threat groups and past reports of what they've done, any kind of new exploits and other things that are out there. You're playing the odds ultimately, right? And as long as you know your tools and what you're defending and what your attackers do, threat hunting becomes a lot more easy, even if you're not a world class, like done this for a decade kind of person. There's still value to be had there. Seek and stack anomalies. This is one thing to do while you are threat hunting. On the next slide, I have a whole bunch of examples of this sort of thing. But what I'm talking about briefly here before we get there is a lot of times threat hunting is about looking for a activity that has no direct signature. This is where I remind you that all attacks are anomalies somehow. They're a new domain, they're a new hash, they're a new login from a new location or from a new location. Something about it is unique. So if you can go into your data with a hypothesis of all bad things are odd, but not all odd things are bad, you can severely noise limit what you have to hunt for to find the bad stuff. So you can do all sorts of stuff to basically say what has happened on this machine the least. Where's the time it ran a hash that it never ran before? Where's an account that logged in here that's never logged in before? And you can start there, and that can be your hypothesis of if an attacker got in here, it's probably something that they got in, they ran the program, they took the thing, and they were gone, versus the stuff that happens all day, every day. Anomalies are a great place to start threat hunting. If you can make more data to find more relevant anomalies, all the better. One of the things you can do here, take a simple thing like a domain name and then say, well, what we normally do is we check our threat intelligence list. Fine, right? But you can do so much more than that. You can say, is this a domain that's super long? Domain generation algorithms make long domain names. Is this a brand new domain on the internet? Is this a ranked domain or is this an unranked domain? What's the prevalence? Is there only one machine in our whole network that's going to that domain name? Is it the first time anyone's ever gone there? What's the TLD? Is it calm or is it something weird like one of the TK domains or the free ones that no one ever actually uses for anything legitimate? There's all sorts of potential options here. So if you can take the data that's not that exciting and turn that coal into diamonds by just adding a few more dimensions to it and then looking for anomalies in those, now you're creating more opportunities to find anomalies. Beyond that, creating time with automation, with anything that you are doing, what we want to do is remove future work. This is one of my long rants that I usually give in class, and I'm going to sum it up into one slide here. If you go to work every day and you ask yourself this question right here, which is from a book called The One Thing that I like a lot, ask yourself, what is the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else becomes easier or unnecessary? In a lot of cases in a SOC, that's automation. People have this attitude of, oh, well, I'll make the automation once I'm done with the alerts and I have time. You're never going to have time unless you force yourself to take the time. And once you do some automation, that buys you more time in the future, which buys you even more time in the future, and so on and so on. We need free time. And so you have to force yourself to do those things that are going to buy you more time in the future. Do things today that make it so you don't have to do things tomorrow. And then that's a virtuous cycle that snowballs. The best teams are always focusing on that. Strategy and tactics. We have to keep a high level view. We have to look at the forest and say, ah, beautiful forest, right? And we have to think of the tactics, the individual items that make it happen. What I'm talking about here is not just looking at individual metrics like mean time to detect and all the stuff that's typically an internal metric in a SOC, but the bigger business picture of what are we trying to do here? What are we really trying to defend? How are our customers judging us? Is the constituency something that's actually happy with us, or are we making a bunch of micrometrics that only matter to us and then confusing them when we report that? You have to come up with a valid strategy. You can use tools like the SOC CMM. It's a big assessment framework you can use to look at your SOC. Find the gaps that are the most important, work to fix them, and make sure you always have a strategy going forward. And then you also have kind of those smaller metrics for internal to the SOC to make sure you are executing on your day-to-day tasks as well. It takes both sides to get this right. Ultimately, to wrap this up, I want to emphasize that you should not feel like you are playing catch up with attackers. If you understand your environment, if you have the right preventative technologies in place, if you understand what you have of value, what they want of yours, and how they're going to get it, you've modeled it all out, you can make alerts stick out that are very prominent that will tell you at the early stages of a targeted attack that will help you disrupt those things and then ultimately save yourself potentially millions of dollars in damages, reputation damage, all those sorts of things. If you are diligent, I'm not saying it's easy, but I am saying there are patterns from the teams that are getting this right. It's going to take a real like go get it attitude in a lot of cases. We don't want to settle for like, it'll be okay, someone will figure it out. That's the attitude that gets you in trouble. So make the attackers rise to your level, practice, test, push as hard as you can because that is what it takes to get this right. So with that, thank you everyone for listening. End of my talk here. If you want more on this, 450, 551 are the two classes that I teach all the time, and then the Blueprint podcast where we go through all of these kinds of things with a bunch of outstanding guests. So that's what I've got. And now back to Dave.
Thank you so much, John. That was really wonderful. And I feel like anyone who sat through that had a list of things they walked away with, things they can do. Manager, tactician, doesn't matter. There was good stuff in there.